Welcome to another episode of Easy IVF. Today we'll be talking about the reasons why you should transfer one embryo, how many embryos you should transfer back when you go in for an embryo transfer. Going through an IVF process can be sort of a very emotional roller coaster, and at times some people do get a rewarding experience going through an IVF as a mother, a partner, or a surrogate. A lot of decision is taken during the course of treatment, but when it gets to the embryo transfer, a lot of couples or expectant mothers struggle to, actually know how many embryos they want to transfer back, depending on which country you are. If you're in the US or in some countries where embryo transfer is not regulated, you would struggle with, knowing how many embryos you want back. Whereas in countries like the UK, Canada, where you are actually restricted from the number of embryos you can get back during your transfer, in that case, that guideline helps you to know how many embryos you're getting back. You don't really have to think about it, or you don't have a choice because it's a set guideline. This is specifically true in countries where medical care is provided by the government. So in this video, we just have a quick review as to the ins and outs of embryo transfer and some of the countries where embryo transfer are regulated, and the reason why you should get one embryo back. The first reason why you should get one embryo back during your embryo transfer is to prevent multiple pregnancy. 1 in 4 IVF pregnancies results to multiple gestation. According to the HFEA in 2005, some people would refer to this phenomenon as having twins. Out of desperation, and also some people would have burning desire to be pregnant, a couple or an individual might be tempted to transfer back more than one embryo at a time, just for the sake of guaranteeing pregnancy. Multiple embryo transfer only increases your success rate or the chances of embryo implantation by about 8 to 9% after the first embryo. So after the first embryo, even if you transfer the second embryo, it only increases your chances of pregnancy by 8 to 9%. Multiple pregnancy can predispose the mother and the child to some life-threatening and long-term disabilities. Take, for instance, compared to singletons, twins are 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy. They are 7 times more likely to die shortly after delivery. They are 10 times more likely to be admitted to neonatal ICU after delivery, and they are 6 times more likely to have cerebral palsy. So there is no doubt that one is able to have a healthy pregnancy with twins or triplets or quadruplets, but at least due consideration should be taken about the increased risk of healthy multiples. Not saying that you can have healthy twins or healthy triplets, but there is higher risk of cerebral palsy, death during pregnancy, and also neonatal complications. The second reason why you should transfer back one embryo is preterm birth. So usually pregnancy lasts for about 40 weeks, and delivery that is less than 36 weeks is considered as a preterm delivery. Twin pregnancies are associated with 3-fold greater perinatal mortality than single pregnancies. Prematurity is the main contributor to preterm birth, with 50% of twin pregnancies delivering before 37 weeks and 10% delivering before 32 weeks of gestation. So some of the short-term complications associated with preterm delivery would be things like respiratory distress syndrome, intraventricular hemorrhage. You also have like sepsis, jaundice, and there's just so many complications that could arise from preterm delivery. The long-term complications of having a preterm birth would be things like chronic lung disease and cerebral palsy, and some other neurological defects can be seen later in life when that child begins to grow. It does make sense to transfer one embryo back and have a healthy child. If you're going through an IVF, I understand that it's already a very expensive process and you'd want to save cost, right? So because of cost, people would be like, well, I'll just rather have 3 of my babies right now or 2 babies right now. So let's talk about money and financing. It has been estimated that 1 embryo transfer is more cost effective than 2 embryo transfer when all the costs associated with multiple gestation are taken into account. So here are some of the scenarios to help you understand the reasoning, right? So for example, According to an old study in Boston, the total cost to a family for a single teen delivery was estimated to be about $9,845 in the US and $37,947 for twins. So a retrospective study also estimated that the cost of IVF procedures plus maternal care as well as the cost of delivery would be $39,000 for single teen or twin pregnancies and up to $340,000 for triplets or quadruplets. And with inflation and in the modern day, the cost to birth a singleton in the US is about $15,000 to $21,000, whereas the cost to birth twins or more ranges from $105,000 to $200,000 depending on the intervention, be it say surgical intervention where cesarean section is used or just medical intervention that involves neonatal care and postnatal care. Now, if you break down the cost, you would see it's actually more expensive to have triplets or twin during an IVF transfer because the cost of care is exponential. It's way more expensive than if you have one child. So if we go back to the cost of freezing your eggs, the cost of freezing 2 or 3 eggs is less than like $2,000 if that's not already factored into your IVF into the cost of your IVF cycle. And the cost of transfer, as we know, is about $2,000 to $3,000. So assuming you've paid for your IVF cycle, transferring one embryo is more cost effective than the cost you would incur with multiple pregnancy. So the only thing that you're saving with having multiple pregnancies from an IVF cycle is time, right? Time in the sense that you could have 2 or 3 kids at once without thinking about going back to the hospital for another transfer. However, the risk, you need to think about the risk. Is the risk worth taking, right? Because you can actually have one child. Let's say if you have a cycle and you got 5 embryos frozen, if you get your first transfer and get pregnant, you still have your 4 embryos in the tank. You can always pay $3,000 to go back to the hospital and have that embryo and have one of your embryo thawed and transfer back. And by so doing, you actually have a healthy pregnancy in the first one, and then you space your child and have the second child. So multiple gestation and multiple pregnancy can also be very, very expensive. You also need to factor in the cost of raising 3 kids at a time. Like, you have to talk about diapers, the stress it brings into your family, which of your partner has to quit your job to be at home, the cost of buying trolleys. Do you have to buy 3 trolleys, 3 pull of everything, right? So if you actually have singletons, that can give you the time and the opportunity to space and plan your family. So even if you don't freeze an embryo, you're still better off doing a fresh IVF cycle, because if a fresh IVF cycle costs you, let's say $30,000, the cost of having triplets is as high as $390,000 post care, right? So even if you're to do a fresh IVF cycle without having any embryo frozen in the bank, you're still way ahead when it comes to the financial implications of having IVF. So all this figure that I've just mentioned is only applicable in countries where IVF is not covered. If you're in countries like UK, Canada, Australia, where IVF is funded, so the cost of IVF is funded and the cost of neonatal care is all taken care of, that would still, the taxpayers will carry a large part of the cost for the complications associated with the twin pregnancy and birth. So the next thing you also need to consider when thinking about multiple pregnancy is the health of the mother. So the maternal health is very important when it comes to childbearing. If you're a guy and you're in a relationship and at times the pressure might come from your partner being, oh sweetie, you can have 2 kids or 3, let's just do this once and for all. But your partner does not really understand the maternal complications that could arise following multiple pregnancy. So sometimes a woman takes into consideration the desire of her husband. For instance, a couple might opt for twin if there is a twin lineage in their family. Men do not experience pregnancy, and as such should not make comments as to or suggest or even have suggestion as to how many embryos the partner or the wife should get back. The physical, psychological, and physiological pressure of multiple pregnancy can result in things like early miscarriage, late miscarriage, which can lead to now depression because you've lost a child that you've been looking for. And things like even anemia can come up from that, hypertension, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes. There's just so much that can come up from having multiple pregnancy. You can also factor in cesarean section, surgery, hospitalization, bleeding, and all that stuff. And if you have cesarean section, that's extra cost to your IVF as well. So aim for one child at a time. Just try as much as possible to put away your selfish desires and and the glorious bends for having 2 or 3 embryos back for the price of one. Always put the health of the mother first. So science wise, and let's even talk science and statistics, right? Let's talk numbers. So when at least 2 embryos were available, a high pregnancy rate of 29.8 was achieved. When only 1 embryo transferred, pregnancy rate were 9%. Like I said, having that extra embryo only increases your chance by 9%. It does not double your chances of getting pregnant. It doesn't take your percentage to 40. Age-wise, although age can sometimes be a factor and a reason why women of advanced maternal age choose to transfer 2 embryo instead of 1, it can also lead to missed abortion and implantation failure when a poor quality embryo is transferred alongside with a good quality embryo. The body of the uterus or the endometrium might reject the poor quality embryo, but the reactive response will now affect the embryo with a better quality, and that might have a higher potential of implantation failure and abortion. So it's better to freeze 1 embryo and just transfer them 1 at a time. Talking about the developmental stage of the embryo, so a cleavage stage embryo is an embryo that is still in the 3rd day of development, whereas a blastocyst is an embryo is on the 5th to 6th day of development. So regardless of the developmental stage of the embryo, transferring more than 1 embryo of any developmental stage can also result into multiple pregnancy. It's at times considered to be an individual choice, right? So it all boils down to the individual's ability to understand the risk, the complications, the reward if it's successful, right? So before transferring more than 1 embryo, it's also good to just talk to your physician to understand the risk of multiple pregnancy and the complications that might arise from multiple pregnancies, and understand your risk factors before making an informed decision. Some advanced country actually has regulated the embryo transfer to be 1, and there's a reason for that. That's just because they think about the health of the mother. They think about the complications that might arise following the transfer of more than 1 embryo. They also think about the health of the unborn child and the possible complications that might arise following having 2 or more babies in a womb, things like cerebral palsy, and that can also place a lot of financial burden on the government or in the household where the government is not involved. I hope you've kind of assimilated some of the things I've said in this video, and I am not saying that having transferring more than 1 embryo is bad. I'm just giving you the I'm just laying down the the medical implications of having more than 1 embryo. There are so many people that have had twins, and there's so many people that have had triplets without having any complications. That being said, statistics and medicine is out there, and the figures are out there for you to kind of like take a look before making your decision. This video is just to help you make informed decisions before transferring an embryo back. If you like this video, please feel free to share with a friend and try and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and cherish life.